Hi, my name is Eva Steiner, and this is my project Psychotherapists Around the Globe. I am interviewing the psychotherapists around the world and asking them the same 8 questions. I am wondering how mental health profession is in their country. Today we are going to... Thank you for doing this interview with me. Before we start, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Hello, Eva. Thank you for having me here. This is a great opportunity, and I'm looking forward to all the interviews you will be doing and to hearing different parts of the world. My name is Vera Castellanos, and I'm a psychotherapist. I'm doing the training as a psychoanalyst and as a psychodynamic psychotherapist. I did a bachelor in psychotherapy sciences and a master's in psychotherapy sciences as well, always with the focus of psychoanalysis. And then I started a doctorate, but I didn't continue it. And I decided to come back to Guatemala, and I came here a year ago.
Tell me a little bit about your culture. What is some holiday or tradition that your country celebrates? And if your culture would be an emotion, what emotion would it be?
A tradition that I enjoy and appreciate a lot is the 1st of November, which is the Day of the Dead. I think in Austria or in Europe it would be All Saints. It's a very interesting holiday because we prepare a meal. It's like a cold salad with cold cuts. It's something very unique of this country, and you only eat it that day. The tradition is of going to the cemeteries and eating with your deceased. Nowadays, not everyone goes to the cemeteries. You go to your grandmother's or your aunt's house, and everyone gathers there, and you try the fiambre and you eat it. So it's similar to Mexican celebration, but we don't paint skulls or we don't hang like these flying colored papers or anything like that. But we do this main dish, and you will find maybe an altar at a house with the pictures of the people that are no longer with us. It's I think it's a special day. And also the interesting thing is that the recipe each family has is a different one, and this is like the recipe that comes from my great grandmother. For example, in my family, they eat the recipe that my great grandmother used to make. Very nice, I think, and a nice way to look at life and at death at the same time.
It's like a happy celebration.
I would say it depends. If you had a recent loss, then this is going to be a day that is going to be really tough for you. But if not, then it's just a nice way of gathering and remembering the stories of what my grandma used to do or what she used to say, and we all laugh together, and it's like it has that fun part of it.
And regarding the emotion,
I had to do some research with this question because I was like, wow, it's actually a great question. And I asked a bit around, and there were a lot of contradicting answers. And I think I came down to it's a very colorful and passionate culture, but it's also very melancholic, and you see this, for example, our traditions are very colorful in the sense like our Mayan heritage, which comes with traditional textiles and all this, or art, or everything is very bright, it's very bright colored. So it's very nice to see. But then you also see when you're at gatherings, for example, with friends or with other people, and people start drinking, and then they always start choosing songs that are extremely sad and that are extremely melancholic or that give a lot of nostalgia. Like it's always about the lost love, it's always about the one that got away.
What do you feel is causing these tones of sadness in your culture?
Well, first of all, this is a very dangerous country. It's ranked as the city, in fact, is one of the most dangerous cities in all of Latin America, I would say. People are always with their nervous system in high alert, and with all the defenses working all at once. And you go outside and you know that you can't take your personal or cell phones or things. You have to be very cautious with that. And you get very quickly used to having to be cautious with that. You automatically have this sense of you live pretty much in a survival mode, I would say. And this might be one of the reasons having to live on a regular basis like this. In fact, if you take public transportations, there's even a higher risk of you getting like mugged or robbed. It's tough with that, I think. But then another thing I would say is maybe the effects that there was a war for 36 years that ended in 1996, and it was a civil war between the army and the guerrilla. It was very long and it was a silent war. And so a lot of the people in the city will give you a perspective, but also a lot of people in the city didn't really know what was happening. And so this, I think, created an atmosphere that still today you see the effects of it. In fact, that was my thesis topic, the transgenerational transmission of trauma. I mean, using those theories to analyze what was going on, especially in the case of violence against women. That's also the thing, you know, women here, the rates are extremely high. I have friends that have told me that they've been in psychotherapeutic congresses in, I don't know, Boston, and suddenly they talk about, well, what's going on in Guatemala, you know, like what's happening there. And I think this also is one of the causes that makes you feel sad, because as a woman, the public space isn't really yours, you know, and you always have to be with a man to go out. You always have to be in company, you know, and this is tough, I think.
How did you become a psychotherapist, and how do you become a psychotherapist in your country?
I graduated from high school and then I started university here for 2 years, clinical psychology. And then for personal reasons, my family moved to Austria and I decided to go with them. So I also moved and had to look for a university. I found one in English, which was a very lucky thing for me. And I did all the things I mentioned before, right? My bachelor, master's, and the doctorate that I decided not to continue. And if I would have stayed here, though, it would have been 5 years of clinical psychology and then doing an exam and a thesis defense. And then you get your degree, and then you either choose if you want to study a master's in something else, or if you want to do some other approach in neuroscience, or you choose what you want to do. And then there are 3 different areas of psychology that you can study, right? So you can be either a clinical psychology or educational psychologist if you want to work with kids, or industrial/organizational psychologist if you want to work, for example, at a company or at human resources. So there's not a strict law like in Austria that differentiates psychotherapy and psychology. This doesn't exist here. You will even find a lot of clinical psychologists that will tell you, we give psychotherapy, you know, or even psychiatrists who will tell you, I also give therapy.
Do you have any training options in Guatemala for psychotherapy?
I would say yes. There's a psychoanalytic school that is pretty strong, the Lacanian psychoanalytic school. So it's Argentina, very big in Argentina, in Brazil, in Mexico, in Colombia. And they all travel and, for example, come here to do seminars, or the group that is here, they gather to study the seminars of Lacan. So there's that approach. I would think there's also a lot of systemic family therapy with the topic of constellations. That's really big here and very strong. And I think it's because of the sense of community that is part of the society, you know. So I think people would rather go to a constellation than to an individual therapy. This is just my opinion, of course. But mostly in most universities, you're going to get a training as a CBT. Most universities here are private, just so you know. There's one that is public. In most of them, I think you get this CBT approach. And there's one where I know it's there's a psychodynamic approach, which is Francisco Marroquin.
How society looks upon psychotherapy or any psychological help?
There's a lot of stigma still, I would say. This is a very conservative and traditional, also religious society, seen upon still as something strange, you know. A lot of people are still maybe afraid of, if I go to the shrink or to the psychologist, I might be crazy. In the families, especially, that are so tight, might be accompanied with shame if there's a member of the family that starts going to therapy or that is struggling with any kind of mental illness. And it's something that shouldn't really be talked about. I would add, maybe this was another effect of this war, that gave this environment of silence, and we shouldn't talk to anyone, and no one can talk about about anything, and very much making it a taboo. I hear stories from my family members or other people of how you would go to a bar and you really couldn't talk to the neighbor because you didn't know which side they were on. This has brought a huge effect on how people relate and how they see psychotherapy. But younger people, of course, it's also becoming a trend. So it's also younger people are looking for answers and wanting to work on themselves. But it's still looked upon, yeah, I would say with some shame, especially within the families. And families mostly are about, we don't talk about things. I come from an open-minded family, I would say. But in general, this is not the norm. And mostly everything should not be talked about. We just swipe everything under the rug.
What does that mean for a therapist in Guatemala?
It takes some time for them to be able to trust, to build the trust with a therapist.
So how do you get clients?
By referral. So get yourself a few psychiatrists and get yourself a few psychologists that you can give your cards to, and that they will help you out if you're opening a practice like I did last year. Also through the social media. What you're asking is if through this stigma it's difficult to get patients. Actually, there's so many people here. So many people. You would be surprised for such a tiny country how we have actually 18 million people living here. So there's always people in need, and there are of course NGOs and maybe the government or associations that are helping out and giving programs with social fees, or for students who are doing their practicums, they will also be working with people at a lower fee, for example.
What is your society teaching about child-parent relationship, and whether these values of society also influence how you design your interventions?
There's a big movement that I came to observe here of psychologists that are getting trainings and becoming parent guides or counselors for parents. All this movement about conscious parenting, all this is very trendy here at the moment. And of course, we don't know how these kids are going to turn out, but I think that it's great that parents are trying to get involved in the development of their kids. Also, I think there's a part of that also helps them to repair perhaps, or to work on themselves as well and on their own childhood. So I think this is something that is happening at the moment. Not only have I mentioned how Guatemalan society is, but I also should mention that this is a very dependent society, in general. And so, like I said, families are very tight, but also you see this in the therapies, like patients arrive and they want you to give them the answer. They want to know, tell me what to do, And so that's a hard thing always, to stay firm and to make them figure it out on their own and decide on their own and make their own choices. And I think that's something that happens often.
And what is the position of the parent in your society? How important parents are?
Very important. It's for you to know, it's very normal for people to live with the parents until they get married. So you might be in your 30s, even in your 40s, and living with your parents, and then you get married, and then you go out of the house, or you stay living in your parents' house because there's enough space, and so why not? There's maybe, when I compare to my life in Europe and all that independence and autonomy that there's going on there, I find that sometimes there's very little space for people to have that space, that emotional space, to figure out who they are without all the family getting involved. Not only to get to know themselves, but to figure out who they are, to figure out what they really want to do. Is marriage the only solution to get out of my house?
If an adult client would come to you and say, I don't want to contact with my parents anymore, how would you approach?
I would approach it the same way that I would approach any big question, any big decision that they would have. I always say at the beginning of the therapy, from now on, if you're going to make a big decision, we need to talk about it first. And it might need a few sessions, whether it's divorce, whether it's you cutting off your relationship with your parents, whether it's you getting married, whether it's you moving to another country. We need to talk about it first. I would do the same thing with the decision, but I do notice that I have quite a few patients that come to my consulting room because they need help in order to set boundaries with the families. They need help because they, for example, are already earning enough in their mid-20s and they want to move out, but then the families are expecting them to pay them some maintenance for the house or for their household. And so then they cannot really do it alone. So there's a lot of this going on. I have a case, for example, some months ago of a mid-20s that came to say, I have this problem. I want to get out of my house, but I can't because my mother is insisting that I keep paying some fees, some bills, and I can't. Like, I'm fed up with this. I don't want to do it. And my previous psychologist said, well, isn't that what a good son is supposed to do? So he was very upset by this comment, because it's like a repetition of the problem that is going on. I think times have changed. And of course, you also should know that socially in this context, for a lot of people, the children are the pension of the parents, because there's no pension system. So parents will not really be able to, at a certain age, they won't be able to work and they will need the help of their kids. But that's later in time, it's important to know that there's a certain period of time in your 30s or 40s where you have to also find that independence and make your own life, otherwise there's never really a chance for you to grow.
What are the learned beliefs regarding client-therapist relationship, and can the relationship continue outside the therapy once the therapy process is over?
I would say it shouldn't be that way. I don't think you should continue any relationship after a therapeutic process. I think it should end. And there's maybe 5 or 8 years where there shouldn't be any kind of contact. But this is a small place, so, you might bump into your patients. There was a psychoanalyst once who told me, I was at a wedding once and I met a supervisee, then I met a few patients, and we were all in 3 different tables sitting there. So these things might happen here. I remember bumping into my analyst a few times in Vienna when I was starting analysis, and so I would say I pretty much would do the same, He just smiled at me from a distance. He didn't greet me or anything. He respected my privacy. And this is exactly what I would do, right? Unless they come and they want to say hello to me, and then I will go with it. But other than that, I will keep it as quiet as possible.
And is supervision a must for a therapist in your country?
I don't think it's a must. I do it because I enjoy it. I take some breaks every now and then, but it's very important for me. And here, I don't think it's a must.
Is there any law for psychology?
No. And no law for you to have to take therapy, for example, in order to become a practitioner either. There's a school of psychologists where there's an ethical committee, and there are certain things that, like regulations, that you have to follow, but that's about it.
What are the most common complaints that the client comes to therapy for?
When I compare to the struggles that people have in Europe, I still work with people in Europe, but it's mostly because of being too autonomous or because of being too independent. Whereas here, it's because things are too close and families are too tight. I think there's a lot of lack of boundaries that are not set or that are very hard to set, because isn't that what a good son is supposed to do? For us as children, quote unquote, of our parents, to understand that we can be good to them, but we also need to be adults and responsible for our own lives and make our own decisions, so that line is always very thin. And I think amongst men it's even harder, because they struggle more they don't really have anyone to talk to. You find groups of men where there's no emotional discussions, where this is a very macho culture. So the man is supposed to be the sole provider of the household. The man is supposed to be the one that is in charge of everything, and the one that should be strong and all this pressure is so tough. And I think now times have changed, and now women are earning. Still here, the salaries are still different. You might be both might be managers, but the woman will earn less still. But I think that this is a big challenge, especially when I see that I rarely have work with men, you know, here in Guatemala at least. It's much harder for them to look for therapy. It's much harder for them to talk about their things. And maybe this is one of the things that I found out in my thesis. This is one of the effects that are having breaking out through violence, you know. It's a bit of a generalized answer that I'm giving you, but this is most an issue, you know. How do I set borders?
Can you tell me more about domestic violence?
It's extreme. Just as a trigger warning for any of the viewers here, the thesis that I wrote was specifically on sexual violence against women. Because what I was finding out and what was being talked about, especially during the pandemic, was that a lot of women were being killed, but that they were being raped before being killed, you know? So it's the ultimate level of dehumanization. And for me, this was just like, what is going on, you know? Where is all this hatred from men coming from? And I need to understand this. And of course, psychoanalysis is a great tool. There's a lot of literature, at least I felt, that could give me some insight on what was going on. There's, like I said earlier, right? If you pass from living with your parents to then suddenly getting married and everything is so abrupt and you don't have any kind of space to self-develop or like to develop yourself, I mean, or to get to know who you are, or what are the things that you like to do, or all these things, then there's a lot of conflict in your marriage by feeling that then your partner is either the controlling one or you feel suffocated by your wife, all these things, or you're scared of going home. So all of these things are having an effect in what's going on. This is a society that is very much about appearances. Appearance here is more important than anything else. It's more important how you look than how you feel. This is a terrible thing, I think, because then, of course, a lot of marriages remain just to be a part of a certain status or just to show that we're still married, but maybe behind the scenes, there's something terrible going on. So it's really interesting because you will see how women are viewed in this culture, you know, either they are seen as these idealized mothers, wives, virgins, let's even add to that, often the case, that are seen very much in very admired way, and then you will see women being mostly denigrated. So there's a huge split between women and how they are perceived by men. It must have something to do also with how mothers are treating the sons, you know, and how they are raising them and how they are maybe not wanting to let them go, how they maybe don't want them to grow. All these things might be having an effect, and men are feeling them. And then you have a lot of men that are emotionally immature, especially because also there's not a good net of support that they have, and no one really asks the man how he's doing, and all these pressures that I mentioned before, it's a lot for them, I think. Not a justification, but it's a lot. But here, for example, prostitution is very everywhere, is a big thing, you know, so maybe this is how they get it out. But I would say also a lot of the results from this war were of men being severely traumatized, and soldiers and guerrillas, and since they were teenagers or they were 9 years old, being severely psychologically abused and castrated also psychologically. And so all this had an effect. And how has this been transmitted? What happened to the kids of these people? What happened to all the results of the violations of women during this war as well, you know, because there was an enormous amount of rape going on there. So what's the result of me having a child by rape, and then seeing my child and seeing in the eyes of my child my abuser, you know? Is there love? Is there hate? Is there disgust? What is there?
If you would share one tool, belief, or approach that is a must-have for you as a therapist, what would that be?
One of the things that has helped me the most, I think, from a supervisor was she encouraged me to listen to myself, to listen to how I'm feeling, to be confident, to know that I'm doing a good job because I'm doing a training because I'm doing my own therapy for years, so many years of therapy, so many hours of supervision, so many hours with patients. She encouraged me to also put that into account and to know like you're doing the work, you know, and you're also working on yourself and you're working on your self-development and on how to grow as a person and as a human being. And all this should give you confidence to know that sometimes you might not know what you're doing in a session, but most of the time you have to like really listen to yourself and trust yourself with the work you're doing. It's a very risky job, of course. I mean, people put their lives and their existence in your hands, so it's a delicate thing, you know, and it's a high responsibility, but I think that it's also something that we should also take care of with taking care of ourselves and working on ourselves.
Thank you for doing this interview with me.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the next ones that will pop up and from where they will be.